When Omni-Man ditched his family on Earth, Mark wondered if he'd ever see him again. They thought that chapter of their life was over, however it was only just beginning. Meet Oliver Grayson. This right here is Mark's baby brother, the kid that would one day have the fate of the world quite literally in the palm of his hands. Before risking the lives of all humanity though, this was a happy family. After abandoning his position on Earth, Nolan found himself on the planet Thraxa in hopes of gifting it to the Viltrumites to lessen his punishment. Due to a rule stating that the oldest living person be made into the monarch, and with the local population of bug people living for only around 9 months, Nolan was made king. However, his time on Earth had changed him and he was aware of that. His goal soon changed from giving the planet to Viltrum to starting a new life. He found himself some of the local Buggersea, and a little while later they had a purple baby named Oliver. This meant that he was part Viltrumite and part Thraxan, thus had some wild genetics. We all know that Viltrumites are extremely strong, can fly beyond light speed, survive in extreme temperatures, and are more or less... On top of this though, due to the Thraxans' short lifespan, they develop photographic memories, allowing Oliver to learn things incredibly quickly. Nonetheless, it makes aging a super weird process for him. One of his parents is destined to die before they ever reach 1, whilst the other will live well into their thousands. This meant that Oliver ages faster than your typical Viltrumite, or even human. In spite of this, once he reaches his teenage stage, that is when the Viltrumite DNA causes it to slow down. That being said, Oliver, even as a baby, was a prodigy and a genius. There is a major caveat to this though. Whilst he will become more powerful at a faster rate than Mark does, his overall power ceiling is weaker. That said, word of Nolan's betrayal reached the Empire, causing them to send 3 Viltrumites to capture him. However, Nolan didn't want to give up his new life. Not a second time. He had already lost everything due to Viltrum once already and couldn't do it again. With no other option, Nolan had to call upon his own son for help. Mark Grayson. More specifically, Mark would be tasked with protecting his new stepbrother Oliver and stepmother Andressa, whilst Nolan fought off other Viltrumites. Nonetheless, things fell apart pretty quickly as Nolan is defeated and arrested, leaving Mark behind to restore Thraxa as their new monarch. By the time Mark had helped fix things up, Andressa was already looking super old and Oliver was already starting to walk. That being said, the queen knew that she was going to die soon. Thus, she told Mark that entire kingdoms will rise and fall before Oliver is even an adult. So whilst she does care for him, she knows that he doesn't belong with them. This parallels the speech that Nolan tells Mark at the end of season 1. It's the motherly version of asking Mark, what will Oliver have after 500 years? Although on Thraxa it may as well be 5 years. So it's decided that Mark will bring Oliver back to Earth, where he tells his already heartbroken mother that Nolan gave backshots to a bug and that she will have to raise the kid. My guy straight up cooked his wife and said, you take the kid, I ain't even gonna pay child support. Obviously Debbie isn't super psyched at the idea, but when she ends up looking at the little guy smiling, you can't really help yourself. For the most part, this means that Oliver would be safe. However, when Angstrom breaks into Debbie's house and holds her hostage in issue 32, Oliver is put into danger as well. Interestingly here though, Angstrom mentions that across all the dimensions he's explored, this is the only one that Oliver exists in. This is because in almost all other timelines, Mark either sides with his father because Eve is taken from him, or his dad raised him away from his mother to be more like a Viltrumite. Without Nolan ever leaving Earth, he never goes to Thraxa and Oliver is never born. This makes Oliver and Eve the two fundamental differences in what allows Mark to be a hero rather than the worst villain of all time. After the Angstrom incident though, Cecil hooks Oliver up with a tutor named April that specializes in working with super children. However, by the time she tutored him for a month, he was already reading at 7th grade level, or by Twitter standards, I don't know, university level maybe? By the time Mark gets back from space in issue 42, Oliver is already physically about 10 to 12 years old and already able to fly. The difference between when Mark and Oliver got their powers means quite a bit in terms of their mentality. Mark was basically an adult. Whilst he didn't know how to use his powers, he did know when and why to use them. Mark wanted to save people and he could recognize that being irresponsible with his abilities could lead to people dying or serious damage to the city. Oliver, on the other hand, is a few months old and his morality, as we're gonna see soon enough, is questionable at times. A huge factor in this is how they were raised. Remember, Mark had his father, Omni-Man, Earth's greatest hero, as a role model, and that is missing in Oliver's life. In fact, as we learn in issue 47, Debbie doesn't like to talk about Nolan at all, which is like totally fair. However, this means that Oliver doesn't really know where he comes from, and the only superhero model he has is Mark, who is almost always at school. That said, Oliver talks about how he has a perfect memory of everything he's experienced since he was born, and is confused why everyone seems so nervous to talk about his father. He explains, "I remember the man my father was. He was kind, caring. I do not recall ever having reason to fear the man." At the same time, Oliver had been researching his father's life on Earth and found that until he began his attack, he was very much the same man here. So he tells Mark that their father seems to be two people, one kind and one savage, but he isn't sure which version is an act and which is his true nature. This essentially brings to the surface all the emotions and feelings that Mark had been experiencing since he fought Nolan all those months ago. Whilst they're talking, Mark gets a call to deal with two villains. Oliver hops in to help, and his takeaway is this. He says to Mark, "That was good, right? I did good? I wasn't sure if I could do it, but man, this is almost easy." Like we said, Mark knows when to pull a punch, but Oliver doesn't, which means he's going to dominate everyone around him, best shown as we see him punch Tether into a building with no effort. Whilst Oliver wants to become a superhero sidekick, Mark he's less sure. This is made even worse when Mark and Cecil butt heads pretty intensely, with Mark telling Cecil that if he approaches Oliver, then he will kill him. So, you know, Oliver wasn't exactly going to be working for the GDA anytime soon. Now, this is about the time Mark also drops out of school, and because of this new closeness to his brother, Mark chooses to take Oliver directly under his wing to teach him about how to use his powers, kicking things off by visiting Art Rosenbaum to get Oliver a costume, and with that we see the birth of Kid Omni-Man, which, yes, it's a terrible name. Now, Mark realizes that this could be a red flag to all the people on Earth who are actually hurt by the real Omni-Man, but Oliver says that he wants to honor his father with his name and hopes to be doing good to help redeem him. On their first job together, Oliver gets a little bit too excited and ends up getting shocked by Kursk, with Mark yelling at him for putting himself in danger. Of course, this is coming from a place of worrying though, and on the way home he seems to realize that he overdid it and begins complimenting Oliver on how fast he is developing, before offering to take him to the hot dog place that Nolan had brought Mark to in the past as a means of an apology. In issue 52 we see Mark heading to fight the Mauler twins, and whilst Mark wanted Oliver to stay behind, he ends up flying out to help his brother anyways. The Maulers end up shooting a nuclear missile into space and Mark leaves to stop it, resulting in a 2v1. Now, we've all seen how strong the Maulers can be, right? So this fight goes just about how you'd expect. Psych. Oliver literally punches a huge hole through one of them like a gory dragon punch. The other Mauler is terrified and surrenders, but Oliver just uppercuts him so hard that his jaw explodes through the top of his head. The Immortal is there to see this all and is horrified as Oliver swears that it was an accident, but let's be real, look at his face before punching the dude. This wasn't an accident at all. Cecil arrives and tries to console him, telling him that people just aren't used to seeing a child make people explode like that. Mark, on the other hand, isn't so forgiving, demanding Oliver meet him in the sky now. Oliver asks if Mark is mad because he defeated those guys, but Mark corrects him saying that he didn't defeat them, he killed them. Oliver continues by asking Mark what's wrong with killing murderers, saying it's better that they can't kill people anymore and that Mark should be happy. Even when Mark pushes back and says that they don't kill people, Oliver calls him out for being a hypocrite because he killed Angstrom. Ultimately, this argument comes down to Mark being more concerned that Oliver doesn't seem to care that he killed someone, with Oliver doubling down on it, saying that it's okay to kill evil people. He asks how many times they've had to stop the Maulers in the past, saying that if they were to just kill them the first time, then countless people would have been saved, and that the logical solution is to stop the villains permanently. And this brings us to the big difference between Mark and Oliver. The moment the fate of humanity was hanging by a shoestring, whether they knew it or not, Mark believes he's capable of making mistakes, and that people can change. If he just starts killing every enemy, then he could either kill an innocent person or a person that could have ended up being good over time. Imagine if Nolan was killed when he attacked Earth. Oliver would have never been born and Nolan would have never been able to redeem himself. To Mark, this makes life precious, but Oliver disagrees, essentially making the same argument that Nolan made when he fought Mark. If humanity doesn't see themselves as precious, if they murder and hurt each other every day, then why should heroes treat them any differently? Even with that in mind though, when Oliver asks if Mark ever considers that their father was right, Mark can't deny imply that sometimes he does. However, I think the most important lines in understanding Oliver happen in their following discussion during issue 53, where he says, "I'm not from this planet. I'm not even partially human. I don't relate to these people. I don't understand these people. And in all but a few cases, I don't like these people. Where I come from, the greater good in society as a whole are vastly more important than the individual. Everyone here is so selfish and self-centered, it's disgusting." It's a complete flip and reimagining of Nolan's perspective as a Viltrumite. Whilst Nolan believed that the people of Earth were terrible to each other and needed the guidance of Viltrum to correct their course by force, Oliver believes that there is no saving humanity as they are too far gone, and because of that, their lives are inconsequential. Ultimately, Oliver would apologize to Mark after having some time to think, saying that if Mark saw value in these people, then there is a possibility that his own views were wrong. So as long as Mark is willing to respect their differences and understand his views might not be the norm, then he will try to be better as well. They hug and make up, but Oliver is clearly not super happy to be in this position. It wouldn't be long after this until Oliver left for his first solo mission in issue 56. Taking Mark's advice, he tries to be more patient when he crossed the villain rampage. The dude is basically stuck in a suit and needs to be knocked out of it, but in trying to help with this, Oliver more or less destroyed the whole city block by the time Mark gets there. This leads to Mark believing that he needs to take responsibility for his brother's shortcomings, because it just means that he hasn't trained him well enough to be a hero.
By issue 58, only a month since they started training together, Oliver had more or less become as fast as Mark, really showing us just how quickly he was developing. That said though, his control is still way off, and we see him crashing into Debbie's roof when he and Mark are racing. This development isn't just in terms of his power though, as April mentions that at this rate, she will need to be learning things along with Oliver because she won't have anything more to teach him. So just how does this prodigy stack up against Mark? Well, we get to find out as we enter the Invincible War. Angstrom invades with an army of 16 parallel Marks, and Oliver needs to fight one of them. While we don't really get to see much of the fight, we later find out that he and the evil Mark made it out alive. But that brings us to the big climax of the arc. Our Mark has Angstrom held down by his throat, and Oliver calls out that his brother needs to kill Angstrom. He has laid so many cities to waste in this invasion, and if Mark doesn't kill him now, then Angstrom will just escape and do it all over again. Adding on to that, if Mark did finish the job the first time like he believed he had done, then this never would have happened. Thus, Mark steals his resolve and decides to kill Angstrom, but the villain manages to escape through a portal. It is too little too late, and Mark has lost his battle of morality with Oliver. Sometimes killing the enemy is the only way, and he has admitted that now. With the world in ruin, Oliver helps with the repair effort, but Earth would have no time to mourn the fallen as Conquest appears. This is a legendary Viltrumite, and Mark is getting his booty blasted in this fight, so Oliver jumps in to help.
That's a terrible idea.
As Conquest puts it, he's planning to split Oliver in half and eat his heart. Oliver only survives because Mark manages to get back in time to pull Conquest off him so that Cecil can take him away through a portal. In issue 65, when Oliver is almost done recovering at the hospital, Mark visits him and admits that he was wrong. After seeing what Conquest did to Eve, he will no longer hesitate to kill anyone who endangers his family. I think the most interesting part of Oliver's character by far is this push and pull of morality between him and Mark. When Mark is trying to convince Oliver to not kill people, the world presents him with all of these terrible experiences. Meanwhile, Oliver is really taking to heart the lessons he learns from Mark. He's doing his best to understand and help humanity, but then Mark comes back here and says that Oliver was right the whole time, corrupting all of that progress. And that brings us to issue 68. Some time has passed and Oliver is now physically in his teens, noticeably more pink than purple now, and wearing a much cooler costume while donning the name Young Omni-Man. However, the biggest adjustment for his character would come in issue 71. Mark is planning to head into space and help with the Viltrumite War, and originally Oliver is supposed to remain on Earth. But then Nolan arrives, and for the first time since he was a baby, like 6 months ago, Oliver gets to meet his father. This is easily one of the most heartfelt moments in the series. As soon as Nolan meets Oliver, he recognizes him and wants to know everything that he's experienced experienced on Earth. He then invites him to join the war effort to make an excuse for spending more time with him on the trip. You can literally see Oliver's face light up with joy when Nolan says this. That said, the moment is kind of ruined when Viltrumites destroy their ship. Conquest had returned alongside Lucan and a third Viltrumite to stop our crew from making it to the war. While Oliver is definitely out of his depth here, it does give Nolan a chance to show how much he cares by saving him, even saying that he's impressed by how strong his son is now. However, this is when disaster strikes, because Oliver is the least developed Viltrumite. He isn't able to hold his breath as long as the others and needs to escape to a nearby planet for air. Conquest makes a mad dash after him, forcing Mark to stick to his philosophy. This time, he makes sure to kill Conquest, even at the cost of having all of his internal organs pulled out. Luckily, Nolan arrives and wraps him up, but it would still be a few months before he's fully healed and able to join the war effort. Meanwhile, Nolan and Oliver use this as an opportunity to make up for lost time. They train and discuss how Nolan truly feels about Debbie and how Viltrumites can actually care for each other, how Earth changed Nolan, and how Oliver finds most humans unappealing to look at, finding his mother's people to be more of his preference. And also a lobster one time, but let's not get into that because Mark is back and ready for war. Together with the Coalition army, they force the Viltrumite back to their homeworld. However, they are ambushed with Oliver being labeled inferior because he is a half-breed. But Oliver gives a very well thought out and calculated response by punching the dude who said it right in the balls. That's my goat right there. Truly showing us that in some way all men are equal. That said though, it's true that Oliver is weaker than his brother and father, which bodes very poorly for him when he comes across Emperor Thrax. The leader of the Viltrumites punches his jaw off with such force that the arm he is holding is ripped off too. In the end, the Viltrumites win the battle at the expense of their planet, opting to leave Mark and Nolan alive because let me check on that. Plot armor. Yep, it's because of plot armor. Luckily, Oliver also manages to survive and is put into a Coalition healing tank after getting a mechanical arm and jaw implanted. He won't be as strong as before anytime soon, but at least he's still alive. The story then follows Mark back to Earth for a bit, leaving Oliver to heal on Telescria with Alan. The next time we'd see him would be in issue 85, where he has more or less made a full recovery. And this recovery is all thanks to GamerSupps. I'm serious, trust me here. There's no better drink in the entire galaxy for giving you a power-up like GamerSupps. If you don't believe me, you can literally try it for free right now. If you like what you see, then head over to gamersupps.gg and use code ABD to get 10% off. Now, after hearing how great that deal on GamerSupps is, Nolan and Devi move to Telescria where they're reunited with Oliver. However, he wasn't the son they once knew. You see, the Viltrum army escaped to Earth where they're planning to repopulate, and because of this, Alan is planning to release a virus on the planet to kill all of the Viltrumites, despite knowing that it might wipe out humanity as well. Nolan and Alan end up scrapping in space over this, and Oliver arrives to protect his father. But when he hears the context, he ultimately sides with Alan, saying the best thing for the universe is to have the Viltrumites killed, and if humanity is the cost of that, then that's just how it has to be. It's the extreme version of the discussion Oliver and Mark were having in the past. What is one life versus 100? Or in this case, what is one planet versus an entire galaxy? To Oliver, it's a no-brainer, but shock to nobody, Mark is dead against the idea. Again, a fight breaks out, but when Thrax steps in to protect his people, Alan is forced to agree to a truce. Oliver, on the other hand, is not willing to listen. In the chaos, he grabs the virus and flies towards Earth. Mark chases after him, and as the brothers fight, the virus is released directly into Mark's face, and for the first time, Oliver understands the weight of an individual life. When it came to the people of Thraxa, they are born knowing they are soon to die. They don't care about their own lives and instead focus on their society as a whole. So while Oliver experienced his people being savaged by the Viltrumites, he didn't feel much about it. However, outside of that situation, Oliver had never lost anyone. He believed that all life and all death would feel the same as it had on Thraxa. But in this moment, he realizes that Mark, his brother, who he genuinely loves and can have a future with, was going to die because of it. In spite of all this, he's still unable to empathize that this is true for more than just the people he cares about. In issue 90, when we see him talking to Alan, he's completely unbothered by his actions and holds that life is not such a special thing, which, as Alan says, is unsettling. However, in issue 96, when he's apologizing to Mark, he says, I was only thinking about the greater good. If losing someone close to you feels like this, if that's what it's like to have a loved one die, maybe I was wrong about the whole thing. With that though, he says goodbye to Mark and returns to live on Telescria with Alan. It wouldn't be until issue 118 where we see him again, now officially the same age physically as Mark, and has completely lost his purple and pink skin color. By this point, he's dating this absolute baddie of a lobster lady named Haluma. As Oliver says, have you seen those mandibles? Oh my god. Nah, I'm not gonna make that joke, bro.
You naughty.
Eventually, Thrag is located with Mark and Oliver sent after him, only to find out that he has already left the planet and they will need to explore for clues. This leads to some time travel shenanigans when Mark meets a hentai monster and 5 years of the story is entirely skipped over. Classic example of top tier writing, right?
Who?
In issue 127, we are introduced to Oliver, who looks like a Viltrumite Freddie Mercury, who has officially passed Mark in physical age. In this 5-year time skip, Oliver has 2 kids with Haluma, and they look terrifying. But more importantly, he's working as a double agent for Alan and infiltrating Thrag's empire. However, he puts Oliver to a test. Thrag had located Mark and was on his way to execute him. If Oliver was loyal to him, he was to sit at home and do nothing. However, at the end of the day though, this is Oliver we're talking about, the sidekick of Invincible. He couldn't just sit there and do nothing whilst his brother was killed. Thus, he flew in to protect him and his family. Unfortunately though, as Oliver steps in to save his niece, Thrag impales him, sending his organs flying out his back. Thrag would then go on to decimate Mark and his family, leaving them both to die. Nonetheless, on her deathbed, Eve's powers kick in, saving and rebuilding everyone there except Oliver. She says that she was too late to save him for some reason, you know, I don't know how, but you know, it happens, I guess. However, he wouldn't die in vain, as his death acts as a catalyst that brings Mark, Eve, Nolan, and the rest of the Viltrumites back into the war effort to defeat Thrag once and for all. To experience more peak fiction, watch this video on your screen right now, where we power scale Mark trying to answer the question if he can really kill Superman.